The first voicemail came from my own number. I was standing in the frozen foods aisle at a Kroger outside Lexington when my phone buzzed in my pocket. I almost ignored it. Most calls that come in after 6 are either work, wrong numbers, or somebody trying to sell you a version of your own anxiety. But when I looked at the screen, I stopped walking. Incoming call me. Not my contact card. Not my name. Just my number. For a second, I thought it had to be some kind of carrier glitch. Phones do strange things now and then, and most of them are less interesting than they look. Still, I didn't answer. It rang 5 times, then stopped. A few seconds later, I got the voicemail notification. I listened to it right there beside the freezer doors, with a woman on the next aisle comparing prices on soup, and a stock clerk cutting open boxes with a blade. The message lasted 11 seconds. At first there was only static, then a breath, then my own voice, low and careful, saying, "Don't go back to the house tonight." That was it. No explanation. No second sentence. Just my voice speaking like it had already accepted I wouldn't listen. My name's Grant Holloway. I was 43 that winter, living alone for the first time in nearly 16 years. And by then, I had become the kind of man who appreciated ordinary things a little too much. A full tank of gas. A clean sink. Silence that didn't feel like punishment. My marriage had ended 8 months earlier in the quietest possible way. No affair. No screaming. No dramatic last scene where one person becomes the villain and the other gets to keep the sympathy. Just erosion. Years of working around each other's disappointments until one day there wasn't enough left to call love without feeling dishonest. She moved to Nashville. I stayed in Kentucky. Not because I was brave or stubborn. Mostly because I had nowhere else in mind. The house had belonged to my father before me. 2-story, white brick, built in the 70s on the edge of a small road outside town. Not quite country, not quite suburb. The kind of place where people wave if they've seen your truck more than twice. I grew up there. Left for college. Came back after my father's stroke. Stayed after he died. That's how life usually traps you. Not with one big decision, but with a series of reasonable ones. By the time I got the voicemail in Kroger, I had already been thinking about the house too much. Not because anything dramatic had happened there. That's probably the first thing I should say. Nothing loud. Nothing you could point to in daylight and call proof. It was slower than that. The kind of thing a man starts by excusing. 3 weeks earlier, I had gone up into the attic looking for a box of old tax files and found a chair I didn't recognize. Just a wooden kitchen chair near the back wall beneath the small round vent. Nothing special about it. Cheap pine. Scraped legs. One spindle loose in the backrest. It bothered me because I was certain it hadn't been there before. My father had kept the attic nearly empty. That was one of his rules. He didn't trust houses that stored too much. Said clutter gave things a place to hide, though he never explained what things. After he died, I left most of the attic alone except for a few boxes of paperwork and Christmas decorations that never made it back downstairs because I stopped pretending I'd use them again. So when I saw the chair up there, angled toward the vent as if somebody had been sitting in it, I stood still longer than I should have. I remember the air being cold enough to sting the inside of my nose. The insulation exposed between joists. The flashlight beam shaking slightly in my hand, even though I wasn't especially afraid. Just unsettled. I told myself the obvious thing first. Maybe my father had dragged it up there years ago. Maybe I'd forgotten. Memory doesn't fail dramatically most of the time. It just gets tired and leaves little gaps for you to trip into. So I left the chair there and found my tax files and climbed back down. That should have been the end of it. But 2 nights later, I woke up at 2:17 in the morning because I heard something overhead. Not footsteps. Nothing that clear. A soft dragging sound. Wood across wood. Slow enough that for a moment I thought I was still dreaming it. Then it came again. A short scrape from the attic directly above my bedroom. I lay there listening. The house held its breath around it. Old homes always have noises. Pipes settle. Framing contracts in the cold. Heat kicks through vents with little metallic sighs. But that sound had direction. That's what I kept coming back to later. Not loud. Not forceful. Just directed. As if something was being moved carefully. I got out of bed, stood in the dark hallway in my socks, and looked up at the attic hatch and the ceiling outside the guest room. Nothing moved. Nothing sounded again. The hatch stayed closed. And after a minute, I went back to bed because grown men do that sometimes. They choose the explanation that costs less sleep. The next morning, before work, I went back up. The chair had moved. Not far. Maybe 2 feet. But enough. Now it faced the center of the attic instead of the vent. If I'm honest, that was the moment I should have told somebody. A friend, my sister, maybe even one of the neighbors, though I didn't especially like the idea of giving rural Kentucky the gift of a story about a divorce claims adjuster getting nervous over attic furniture. Instead, I took a picture of it with my phone, not for evidence exactly, more as a way of proving to myself that I was still a man who noticed facts in the right order. Then I carried the chair downstairs and left it by the garage door. Problem solved. Or that's what I thought. The following evening I came home from work, unlocked the back door, and found the chair sitting at the kitchen table, pulled out slightly, facing my father's old place setting. My father had been dead nearly 4 years, and until that moment, I had not realized I still thought of one side of the table as his. That's the uglier part of grief, I think. Not crying, not anniversaries. The way a room can preserve a person more faithfully than your mind does. I stood in the kitchen still holding my work bag and stared at the chair. There are only a few possibilities in a moment like that. 1. Someone is in your house. 2. Someone has been in your house. 3. You are no longer the kind of person who can trust his own sequence of events. The first possibility is the most useful because it gives you something to do. I set my bag down, checked the locks, searched the rooms, opened closets, looked under beds even though I knew how absurd that was. Nobody was there. The windows were latched. The doors secured. No signs of forced entry. No missing valuables. Just the chair, sitting there like part of a conversation I'd arrived too late to hear. I dragged it out to the garage and wedged it behind paint cans and a dead mower battery. Then I shut the garage door, came back inside, and ate dinner standing at the counter because I didn't want to sit at the table with the memory of it. For the next several days, nothing happened. That was almost worse. The ordinary routine returned too easily. Work, coffee, laundry, a football game half-watched. The small machinery of a life kept moving, and because nothing else happened, I began revising the story for myself. Maybe I brought the chair down distracted and forgotten. Maybe I had pulled it out of the table without thinking while cleaning. Maybe my father had trained me better than I realized to distrust empty spaces, and now I was just inheriting his habits without the useful parts. That's the thing about quiet fear. It doesn't ask to be believed all the time. It just waits for your skepticism to tire. A week later, I found the photograph. It was tucked inside a shoebox of old receipts in the hall closet while I was looking for an extension cord. Small Polaroid. The color had yellowed slightly with age. At first, I thought it was a picture of the attic vent. Then I realized what I was actually looking at. The attic. Shot from the attic itself. The camera pointed toward the hatch. The vent visible on the right. Insulation and joists along the edges. And in the center of the frame, facing away from the camera toward the closed hatch, the same wooden chair. My stomach tightened in a way that felt old. Not panic. Recognition. Something about the photo was immediately wrong beyond the obvious. I just couldn't name it at first. Then I looked more closely. The attic hatch in the picture was closed, which meant somebody had taken a photograph while already up there. The photo had no date on it, no writing on the back, nothing but the dead weight of an image that should not have existed. I sat on the hallway floor with the Polaroid in my hand and tried to remember whether my father had ever owned a camera like that. He hadn't. He used a cheap Nikon in the 80s, then a digital point-and-shoot once my sister bought him one for Christmas. Not Polaroid. That mattered for some reason. Maybe because film photographs suggest intent. They cost more. You don't take them casually and forget them in a closet by accident. That night I called my sister, Erin. She lived in Bowling Green with a husband I respected and 2 teenagers who answered questions the way hostages do. I didn't tell her everything. Just asked if she remembered the attic chair. What chair? Old kitchen chair. Pine. Loose spindle. A pause. Then, Dad used to keep one up there. I sat up straighter on the couch. For what? I don't know. He said it was easier than standing. That answer stayed with me. Standing for what? Another pause, longer this time. Gran, are you okay? That's the moment people always pick, isn't it? Not when you ask a strange question. When you ask the second one. Yeah, I said. I'm just clearing things out. She didn't sound convinced, but she let it go. After he hung up, I sat in the living room in the dark for a long time with the Polaroid on the coffee table. My father kept a chair in the attic. That part now had a shape, but it raised something else I liked even less. If he used to sit up there, then for what? Near midnight, I went out to the garage and checked where I'd left the chair. It was still there behind the paint cans, which was somehow disappointing. I had started to want the problem to stay visible. When strange things behave consistently, a man can at least choose what to believe about them. It's the drifting that gets you. 2 days later, I got home from work and found the attic hatch open. Not wide, just hanging down an inch or two from the ceiling in the hallway outside the guest room. That was the first time I felt something close to real fear. Not because the hatch was open, because I knew with complete certainty that I had not opened it. I stood beneath it and looked up at the black seam above the folded ladder. No sound from inside, no movement, just that narrow dark opening and the awareness that the house had changed position around me while I was gone. I pulled the ladder down slowly, each metal segment locked into place with a soft, final little click. Then I climbed. The flashlight beam found the vent first, then the joists, then the cleared square of insulation near the center where the chair had used to be. And on the plywood floor beside that empty square, there was a single cassette tape. No case, no label, just a strip of masking tape across one side with 3 words written in my father's handwriting. For After Me. I stared at it longer than I want to admit. Then I picked it up and climbed back down. I didn't own a cassette player anymore, but my truck still had an old tape deck I'd never bothered replacing because it made the dash look less lonely somehow. I sat in the driveway with the engine off and the cassette in my hand, looking at my father's handwriting in the fading light. For After Me. He had known something would outlast him, or thought he did. I almost didn't play it that night, partly because I was tired, partly because dread has a way of convincing you that delay is a kind of control. Instead, I put the tape in the kitchen drawer and told myself I'd listen in the morning. That evening was the one I got the voicemail in Kroger, the one from my own number. Don't go back to the house tonight. I listened to it 3 times in the parking lot before driving anywhere. The voice was mine, not similar, not close. Mine. Same flattened vowels, same slight catch on the hard K and back. Even the tired tone was familiar, like a version of myself from the far side of a long day. I should tell you that I still went back to the house. Of course I did, because by that point, the only thing stronger than my fear was the suspicion that somebody else knew the order of my life better than I did. And once that feeling gets in, going home starts to look like the only remaining form of ownership. It was already dark when I turned on my road. The porch light I always left on was burning yellow against the white brick. Nothing looked wrong from the outside. No broken windows. No cars in the drive except mine. No one on the porch. I sat in the truck for a minute with the voicemail still on my screen and the cassette tape in my coat pocket. The house waited the way houses do, without expression, without apology, as if whatever had happened inside it had happened long before me and would continue after I left. When I went in, the first thing I noticed was that the kitchen drawer was open. Only 2 inches, but enough. The cassette player tape recorder my father used to keep for church sermons was gone. I hadn't even remembered it was in there until I saw the space where it wasn't. That's when I understood the voicemail hadn't been trying to scare me away from the house. It had been trying to keep me from arriving before something else finished listening. I stood in the kitchen for a long time looking at that open drawer. It wasn't dramatic. That was the worst part. No cabinets hanging open. No broken glass. No overturned chair in the middle of the floor like a scene from a movie, trying too hard. Just one drawer pulled out a couple inches, and the ordinary absence of a thing I hadn't cared about until it was gone. My father's old cassette recorder had been there that morning. I was certain of that, mostly because I'd seen the tape in the same drawer and thought, without really thinking, that I'd need the recorder later. Now the tape was still in my coat pocket. The recorder wasn't. The kitchen light made the countertop look tired and too clean. My groceries were still in the truck, but I didn't go back out for them. I pushed the drawer shut, then opened it again, as if the empty space might explain itself the second time. It didn't. I checked the rest of the kitchen first. Not because I expected to find anything useful there, but because people start with the nearest room when they want to pretend they're still being practical. The pantry, the coat closet, under the sink, nothing. Then I moved through the house with that same ugly half-focus I'd had the night I found the chair at the table. Not panic exactly, just a body deciding to do something while the mind falls behind and judges it. Living room, empty. Bathroom, empty. My bedroom, empty. The guest room under the attic hatch looked untouched, but the hatch itself was closed now. That bothered me more than the open drawer. When I had left for Kroger, the hatch had been latched flat against the ceiling. I knew that because I had stood under it for a second before leaving, looking up at the faint outline of it, and thinking about the tape still in the kitchen drawer. Now it still looked flat and ordinary, as if it had never been opened at all. I pulled down the folding ladder and climbed back up. The attic smelled the same as before: dust, old insulation, dry wood, trapped winter cold that hadn't fully left yet. My flashlight beam moved across the joists, the round vent, the cleared square where the chair used to sit. Nothing else. No recorder. No new photograph. No sign that anyone had been up there since I found the tape. I stood in the center of the attic and listened. The house below me made its usual little sounds. Heater ticking. A faint thud somewhere in the wall as old pipes cooled. But nothing in the attic itself. Then I noticed something I should have looked for immediately. The dust around the cleared square was disturbed. Not footprints exactly. The plywood didn't hold dust evenly enough for that. But there were marks. Narrow ones. Two faint curved lines starting near the vent and ending at the square in the floor where the chair had been. Like chair legs. Like someone had dragged it back into place and then removed it again. I crouched down with the flashlight closer to the wood and felt my stomach tighten. My father's attic chair had been here for years, according to Aaron. He used to sit up there. He left me a tape labeled for after me. Someone, or something, depending on how much daylight you want in your thinking, had moved the chair after he died. And now the tape recorder was gone. I climbed back down slower than I'd gone up. At some point while I was in the attic, I had started hearing the voicemail again in my head. Don't go back to the house tonight. Not as a warning now. As timing. Like whoever had called knew there would be a window when I was supposed to be absent. I checked the locks again, even though I'd already done that once. Front door locked. Back door locked. No broken window latches. Garage side door bolted from inside. That left only two options, and I didn't like either of them. Either someone had a key, or someone had never needed one. I stood in the hall outside the guest room and looked up at the ceiling hatch, then at the hallway floor where, when I was a kid, my father used to stop and listen for things the rest of US couldn't hear. He had done that often enough that it came back to me now with embarrassing clarity. Not in a spooky way, just part of him. He would be walking to the kitchen or passing by the stairs and suddenly pause, head turned slightly, like a mechanic listening to an engine that wasn't running right. When I was 12, I asked him once what he was doing. He said, making sure it's still choosing the same way. I had no idea what that meant then, and he hadn't explained it. I wish now that I had made him. I went back to the kitchen and finally brought the groceries in from the truck. Bread, coffee, frozen dinners, eggs, the indifferent supplies of a man living alone. I put them away slowly because ordinary tasks still have a little dignity when the rest of your thoughts don't. Then I called Erin again. She answered on the third ring. You forgot something? She asked. No. A pause. You sound strange. That feels fair. I leaned against the counter and looked at the open space where the recorder should have been. Do you remember Dad ever talking about the attic? Other than telling us not to go up there? Yeah. Another pause. Not long. Just enough that I heard her deciding whether to help or manage me. He said the house carried sound wrong, she said. Remember that? I did. Only once she said it. When we were kids and thunderstorms came through, my father would shut the attic hatch, then stand underneath it until the rain changed direction. If either Aaron or I asked why, he'd say, because the house carries sound wrong when it's full. What does that mean? I asked. I don't know, Grant. Did he ever sit up there? She exhaled softly into the phone. Yes. How often? Some nights. That answer stayed with me. Did Mom know? Yes. And she was fine with it. This time, Aaron let out a quiet laugh, but there wasn't much humor in it. Mom was fine with a lot of things she didn't think she could improve. That sounded true enough to hurt. I looked toward the dark window over the sink. Did Dad ever record anything? Now she went quiet in a different way. The kind where silence becomes material. Aaron. He used to make tapes, she said finally. What kind of tapes? For himself, I think. I found one. A longer pause. Then, Grant, maybe you should leave that house alone for a while. Too late. Don't say it like a joke. It wasn't one. I told her then. Not everything. Not the voicemail. Not the way my own voice had sounded telling me not to come home. But the chair, the photograph, the attic hatch, the missing cassette recorder. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, I think Dad believed somebody could hear through that vent. I closed my eyes for a second. Hear what? Conversations. Movement. Whatever was in the house. Ooh, I don't know. That's not enough. I was 15, Grant. Right. Fair. I rubbed my forehead with one hand. Did he ever say why he sat up there? Her answer came quietly. He said if he stayed in the chair long enough, it would mistake him for the house. I said nothing. Some sentences are too strange to react to immediately. They need to cross the room and sit down first. He told you that? Yes. When? The year after Mom left for her sister's place that summer. I found him taking the chair upstairs. I stared at the hall ceiling, and he said that. He said, if I sit still enough, it mistakes me for the house. I swallowed. Did you believe him? No, she said. But I believed he believed it. That was the problem exactly. You can inherit a house from a man without inheriting the shape of his fear. But if you stay in the house long enough, it starts offering. After we got off the phone, I sat at the kitchen table for a long time with the tape in front of me and my father's sentence moving around inside my head. It mistakes me for the house. There are certain families where nobody says the word illness unless a doctor has already attached paperwork to it. We were that kind of family. Men got quiet. Women compensated. Everybody called it weather and kept going. My father had been a difficult man in no cinematic sense. No rage. No drinking. No scenes. Just a pressure system walking around in a work shirt, alert to things the rest of us treated as furniture. I had spent years sorting him into ordinary explanations. Grief after my mother left. Isolation. The stroke, changing him before it took him. Now I wasn't sure whether I had been generous or lazy. Around 10, I went out to the garage and got the chair. I don't know why exactly. Maybe because if the chair mattered, I wanted it where I could see it. Maybe because some part of me had started treating the house like a problem that could still be solved with arrangement. I carried it back inside and set it in the hallway beneath the attic hatch. The loose spindle in the backrest clicked softly when I moved it. Then I stood there looking at it. A plain wooden chair in a plain hallway. The object itself almost insulted the rest of the evening. I made coffee I didn't want and took it into the living room. The tape stayed on the coffee table beside the Polaroid photograph. I kept the lamp on and the television muted, more for light than distraction. At 10:47, my phone buzzed again. Private number. I let it ring once, twice. Then I answered. For a second, there was only the dry hiss of an open line. Then my own voice said, "You already came back too early." I hung up. The whole call lasted maybe 4 seconds. My heart was beating harder now, but not in the dramatic way people imagine. It felt narrower than that. More specific, like a body beginning to understand that fear may in fact be the correct response. I checked the phone log. No number. No recording saved this time. Just the fact of it. At 11:03, I heard the attic hatch move. Not fully. Just a soft wooden shift overhead, like weight settling on the panel from the other side. I set my mug down. The hallway lamp was still on. From where I sat in the living room, I could see the chair beneath the hatch and the narrow seam around the attic opening above it. Nothing else moved. Then came a second sound. A light scrape. Chair wood against hardwood. I stood up slowly. The chair had moved forward an inch. Not much, but enough that I knew it hadn't been my imagination. I walked in the hallway and stopped. The chair now sat slightly off-center beneath the hatch, angled toward the bathroom mirror at the end of the hall. I hadn't placed it that way. That would have been easier. I looked up. The hatch remained closed. No ladder. No footsteps overhead. Just the chair, the hallway light, and my own breathing sounding too present in the house. There's a point in situations like that where fear splits into two smaller decisions. Either you become more careful, or you become more curious. Neither one saves you. They just choose the tone of what happens next. I went to the hall closet, got the step stool, and climbed up beneath the hatch. The panel felt slightly warmer than the ceiling around it. That stopped me for a second. Not hot, just touched recently. I pressed upward and the hatch lifted at once. No resistance. No latch. As if it had been left ready for me. Cold attic air came down around my face, carrying dust, and that same faint wood smell from before. I shined my flashlight into the opening. The first thing I saw was the vent. The second thing I saw was the cassette recorder. It was sitting upright on the attic floor, directly in front of the chair's old place, angled toward the vent. Plugged into nothing. Impossible, because it ran on batteries and I had not put any in years. Yet the little red light on the recorder was glowing steadily. Play was pressed down, and from the small built-in speaker, almost too softly to hear at first, my father's voice was coming out of the dark. Not speaking to me. Speaking to something else. Calm. Tired. Familiar. Not yet, he said. A pause. Then again, gentler this time. He's still downstairs. For a moment I didn't move. My head was half inside the attic hatch, my hands gripping the edge of the ceiling frame, and the flashlight beam resting on the cassette recorder like it had already decided that was the only thing in the world worth seeing. The red play light glowed softly in the dust. My father's voice came from the small speaker again, thin and slightly warped by the age of the tape. Not yet. A pause. Then the quiet sound of him breathing. He's still downstairs. I felt the muscles in my arms tighten, without meaning to. He wasn't talking to me. Not exactly. The tape had been recorded years ago. Maybe before his stroke. Maybe even before my mother left. His voice sounded younger than the man I remembered at the end, steadier somehow. But the words were shaped around the present. Like he had expected this moment. I climbed up the rest of the way into the attic. The plywood floor creaked softly under my weight. Dust moved through the flashlight beam in slow, drifting threads. The recorder sat near the cleared square, where the chair used to be, facing the vent. The tape continued. You'll hear the chair move first, my father said calmly. I stopped breathing for a second. Behind me, down in the hallway, the chair legs scraped softly across the floor again. Just once. The sound carried up through the open hatch. I turned slowly toward the opening in the ceiling. The chair had moved again. Now it sat directly beneath the hatch, perfectly centered, facing straight up toward me. My father's voice continued through the recorder. That's when it knows you're listening. The tape crackled softly between sentences. He sounded tired, but not afraid. That's important, he added after a moment, because it only learns the shape of a person when they start paying attention. The air in the attic felt heavier suddenly. Not warmer, just aware. I looked back at the recorder. The tape wheels turned slowly inside the plastic window. You might think the chair is the problem, my father said. It isn't. Another pause. You might think it lives in the attic. A faint rustle of the tape. That's not right either. I swallowed. The hallway below me remained quiet now. The chair no longer moved. My father spoke again. It lives in the listening. The sentence landed in the attic like something physical. I felt the weight of it immediately. Listening. The Polaroid photograph flashed in my mind. The chair facing the hatch. The vent beside it. My father sitting up here for hours, maybe nights, with that cheap tape recorder beside him. Not watching. Listening. The recorder crackled again. If you're hearing this, he said, then it means you found the chair before it finished learning you. I looked toward the vent. It was still just a small round metal grill near the roofline. A vent meant to move heat out of the attic in summer. Nothing unusual about it. Except now the faintest whisper of air moved through it. Not wind. Breathing. Slow. Steady. Below me, in the hallway, the chair creaked once more. My father's voice lowered slightly. That's when it starts trying to move you. The tape hissed softly. First the chair, then silence. Long enough that I wondered if the tape had reached the end. But the reels kept turning. Finally he spoke again. Then the house. My throat felt dry. The house. That explained something I hadn't been able to say out loud before. The open drawer. The missing recorder. The attic hatch closing after I left. None of those things required footsteps. A house's weight. Doors settle. Wood shifts. Drawers slide if the floor tilts slightly. If something understood the structure well enough. My father's voice returned. If you're hearing this tape, he said carefully, then it hasn't mistaken you yet. Mistaken. The word hung in the attic. I suddenly understood what Erin meant when she said Dad believed the house could confuse him with itself. He had been sitting up here, staying still, letting the house settle around him, teaching whatever listened through that vent that he belonged. The recorder crackled. I try to make it learn me, he said. I sat in the chair until the house stopped correcting itself around my weight. A faint noise came through the vent then. Not breathing this time. A soft wooden knock from somewhere inside the walls. 3 slow taps. My father heard it too on the tape. That's the signal, he said quietly. It means it's adjusting. The knock came again. From somewhere lower in the house. Moving. My father continued, speaking in the calm tone of a man explaining a tool. It doesn't know what a person is, he said. It only knows shapes that stay long enough. The flashlight trembled slightly in my hand. The chair downstairs scraped again, one leg at a time, like something pulling it forward carefully. Toward the staircase. My father's voice dropped almost to a whisper. If it learns you, the house begins correcting around you. The tape hissed softly. Doors. A creak sounded somewhere behind the attic walls. Floors. A faint shift in the joists under my feet. Stairs. The hallway floor below groaned quietly as the chair moved again. Then my father said the sentence that made the whole night suddenly clear. That's when the house starts bringing you upstairs. My chest tightened. The chair stopped moving, directly beneath the hatch. My father's voice returned one last time on the tape. If you hear the chair stop, Grant. The sound of my name felt like cold water. It means the house thinks you're ready to sit. The tape clicked. Silence filled the attic. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then the recorder's play button lifted by itself with a soft mechanical snap. The red light went dark. And beneath me, the chair legs shifted slightly. Not drag this time. Just settling. Like someone sitting down.